All right, everybody. You know what it's all about. It's all about that Doug life. Anyway, I had to make a stop here for a shout out. I'm on the way to the Promised Land, also known as Pullman, Washington, home of the Cougs, to visit my daughter. And this is Halfway Point. This is Vantage. Right over there is a little town of Vantage. There's a half-star hotel there that my wife absolutely loves. I took her there, nothing but the best. And anyway, this is our version of the Grand Canyon. This is like the mini Grand Canyon. So anyway, Columbia River Gorge, and that's Vantage, Washington that you look at. Pretty much smack dab in the southern middle of the state. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna get set up for my shout out. Hey, it's Twofer. Got the Columbia River Gorge as my backdrop of this week's shout out. This shout out is my Grand Pappy Ralph Douglas Hall. That's right, Douglas is a name in the family. I believe I'm fourth or fifth generation Douglas. So my grandfather was quite a guy. I did not know him, unfortunately, that well. I've met him, but didn't really get to know him when I was younger. He passed away too soon. But as I've done this adventure, diving into the deep end of hunting and fishing, I started talking to my uncles and my dad, and I realized he was actually known to be an outstanding hunter. His claim to fame was, I believe, 11 grouse, not with one shot, but at one time. So that tells me a couple things. One, he was a good shot. Two, they didn't have bag limits back in 1930. And three, they didn't have limits on the number of shells in the shotgun back then. So obviously 11 grouse, how quick those things are, he had to have emptied at least 4 or 5 shotgun shells. Anyway, when I found out that story, I asked my dad, I'm like, well, what's going on, Dad? Grandpa he had all these cool guns, and we went out twice to the backyard, and he said something really interesting. He said, well, I decided to change my gun in for a camera. So he is a huge bird watcher, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized bird watching is very similar to hunting. You just exchange a gun with a camera or binoculars, and you don't kill them. So anyways, but the whole preparation, the whole scouting, all that stuff is just like hunting. So that was it. That was really interesting. So in a lot of ways, my dad carried that over to something that I'm developing now, to be a hunter and fisherman. But one story I need to tell about my grandfather, my Uncle Mark is actually writing a book about this. My grandfather at age 15 went into the Army, and that story of how that happened is like a Hollywood film. So let me tell you about my grandfather. So at age 15, I believe he was a sophomore, so he was probably turning 16 sometime that year. At age 15, he got into a brawl with a kid at school, and the principal came up behind him to pull him off, and my grandfather, not knowing who it was, did one of those backhands, knocked the principal off balance, fell down the stairs. Well, my grandfather wasn't necessarily as scared to be what happened for his discipline at school. He came from an abusive situation. He was more worried what his dad was going to do to him. So what he did, he was a scared 15-year-old, and first thing he did, he ran right down to the recruiting agency. And there was an old sergeant, as the story goes. Old sergeant kind of looks at him. Oh, okay, Hall, here you go, stamp. At age 15, gets into the United States Army, And you have to understand, my uncle does way better job at this, explaining the story. You have to understand, back then, they didn't have an organized military like we do now. It wasn't because the Brits and the French were scared of the U.S. military to come back in the 1700s and 1800s to reclaim their territory. It's because it cost too much. No one was scared of the U.S. Army until the World War I, and then especially II. And then to be in the best fighting force in the world, the United States military. Anyway, so my grandfather, not only does he go into World War I at that time he turned 16, but he started as a 15-year-old. He gets into a situation where he gets injured. Now, I don't know that, again, I put another plug in for my uncle's book. I'll make sure to let everybody know when he publishes it. But my grandfather gets injured somehow, and he's laying in a ditch, and he's next to some water. He scoops up the water and drinks it. Well, in World War I, if you're not a history buff, a lot of countries, especially the Germans, use chemical warfare. So he drank water that was tainted with mustard gas. So he got extremely sick. He's on his deathbed in the battlefield. All of a sudden, here comes someone on a horse. If you've ever heard the expression riding high on the horse, the reason why that was a thing is because the officers, who a lot of times thought they were, all big and important, were up high on a horse. Okay, and that goes way back, to Revolutionary War, past, Anyway, see the movie War Horse. That was basically what the situation was with my grandfather. This guy came up on a horse, and he looks down and he says, "Ho, Ralph, ho!" And my grandfather, delirious, looks up. It was the principal, who was he was a retired Army. My grandfather, Ralph, and two other boys at the school got into the Army underage. So the principal unretires to go in and make sure his kids, meaning his students, are okay. And he saves my grandfather's life. Oh, are you kidding me? Wow, talking about a guy that cares about his students. Anyway, I want to give a shout out to a guy that I have learned that the hunting is in the blood, and it would be really cool to be able to hunt with my grandfather, but I guess he's here in spirit, and I thought this would be a great place to share part of his story and give him this week's shout out. Anyway, peace, 2 for signing out.